The air over New Nairobi shimmered unnaturally, a pale distortion in the sky like a heat wave born from nothing. No clouds moved. No wind stirred. The stillness had weight, an oppressive, atmospheric silence that announced the empire long before their ships became visible. Then, without ceremony, the sky split open. They descended like gods masquerading as machines. Polished hulls gleamed silver in the sun, their wings humming with anti-gravity fields that turned dust into storms and shattered glass just by passing overhead. The lead vessel projected its voice across every frequency in every language. Surrender is expected. Resistance will be brief. Earth complied. No bombs fell. No invasion was necessary. Humanity, divided and exhausted by its own conflicts, watched the stars split and chose survival over defiance. Global governments folded in days. Entire military commands deactivated. In capital cities, empire emissaries stepped down from ships and were handed keys to entire nations like visiting nobility. Their armor was immaculate. Their words were clinical. And their laughter, subtle, quiet, restrained, cut deeper than blades. They called Earth's weapons museum relics, their defenses archaic barricades of rust. High Command categorized humans as emotionally erratic but intellectually promising, a euphemism that meant manageable, controllable, irrelevant. One by one, Earth's military relics were cataloged, stripped, and melted down. But not all of them. Beneath the Kilimanjaro Basin, in the core of a decommissioned NATO bunker sealed before the Empire's arrival, a woman watched the world surrender from a forgotten screen. Captain Juno Reyes, former weapons engineer, now labeled missing by both Earth authorities and the Empire, had not surrendered. She hadn't been asked. She hadn't been found. She hadn't forgiven. Her face was lit only by the low blue glow of emergency LEDs, casting shadows over old schematics pinned to the walls. Next to her, stacks of sealed crates bore obsolete NATO markings, labels long erased from history but burned into her memory. RPGs, fragmentation mines, mobile flamethrowers. She didn't call them obsolete. She called them ready. A voice crackled through her headset, filtered by static. Scout drones confirm. Main convoy past checkpoint Theta. 15 Empire units. One skiff. No ground support. Juno leaned over the screen and traced a route across an outdated satellite map. And the payloads? Primed. Linked. We got 40 seconds till they cross into the kill zone. She clicked a switch and looked up at the blinking light above her. Phase 1. Go. 3 kilometers above, the convoy passed along a winding dirt path flanked by thick jungle. Empire troops in sleek armor moved with manufactured precision, every step calibrated by AI systems linked to orbital sensors. They were confident, unafraid. Nothing had challenged them since arrival. That was the problem. The explosion was crude, deliberate. The first blast lifted the lead walker into the air, shearing it in half mid-stride. The second burst ignited an old fuel trap that sent a fireball through the column, cooking 3 troopers inside their armor before they even understood what was happening. The third was pure noise, reverberating sonic pulses that ruptured eardrums, scrambled HUDs, and turned the Empire's tactical silence into chaos. From the jungle, they came, humans in patchwork gear, faces masked, wielding relics. Shotguns loaded with hand-cast buckshot. Molotovs, rusted light machine guns that screamed instead of clicked. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't efficient. But it worked. By the time the Empire skiff deployed its aerial drones, the resistance had vanished into the canopy, leaving only smoke, scorched metal, and a single hand-painted message scorched into a slab of debris. Fire doesn't need permission. Juno watched the live feed from a salvage drone, arms folded tightly. Her breathing was slow, controlled. Around her, the bunker hummed with subtle life. Barely functioning circuits and half-broken consoles sparked like dying embers, but they were enough. Musa, her communications tech and closest thing to a friend, slid into the room holding a datapad. Empire's calling it a localized instability event. No official response. They think we're tribal insurgents. They always think that, Juno replied without turning. Until they don't. He looked at her carefully. It's starting, isn't it? It started the moment they mocked us. That night, across 5 time zones, Empire patrols moved slower. They activated full-spectrum scanners and ordered helmet recalibrations. Civilian crowds noticed the change, less confident striding, more glances over shoulders. Uncertainty had entered their body language. It was microscopic, but it spread like mold in the foundations of something once considered indestructible. In orbit, aboard the dreadship Sovereign Tithe, High Executive Veroin reviewed the initial incident log. The hololith projected the ambush in grainy detail. Jagged flames, low-tech blasts, screaming. He watched it 3 times in silence. Casualties? 12 confirmed, his adjutant replied. 1 skiff damaged beyond use. Enemy recovered, no Empire technology. Footage spread among local humans, but not off-world. Veroin's face remained unreadable, but he spoke slowly, each word carved from something cold. Begin psychological recalibration protocols. Increase civilian sedation fields. Deploy 2 cleansing squads per zone until further notice. Sir, the adjutant hesitated. Should we notify the council? There's no war, Veroin said flatly. Only pests. He dismissed the projection and turned to stare at Earth, visible through the observation deck. So green. So backward. So familiar. It unsettled him in a way he didn't understand. Back on the surface, Juno walked through the field of twisted metal, stepping over Empire bodies now barely recognizable. The air was still thick with the chemical tang of burnt fuel. She crouched near a shattered helmet, running her hand over its scorched edge. These weren't mistakes. These were messages. She spoke quietly, not to anyone in particular. You stripped our weapons. You called them primitive. But you forgot who invented fire. As she stood, Musa approached, his face somber. There's more chatter. Underground groups. Scattered, yes, but they're listening. Some are already copying your tactics. Juno nodded. Good. They want a name. Something to rally behind. She thought for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she whispered it like a vow. Call it Ash Phoenix. Musa raised an eyebrow. Sounds poetic. It's not. It's what's left after everything burns. As they left the wreckage behind, the last of the flames still danced in the dark, casting shadows taller than any human. But they were human shadows. And for the first time in weeks, the darkness didn't feel empty. It felt alive, smoldering, waiting for air. The stench of ionized air still clung to the ruins of Kilify as dawn painted the sky in bruised shades of purple and ash. Smoke curled from the husks of alien patrol vehicles, still smoldering, their elegant forms buckled and blackened. What was once a quiet corner of Earth's occupation zone now marked the first true retaliation. And it would not be the last. Juno Reyes knelt beside a shattered armor plate, brushing soot away to expose the Empire's insignia, a gleaming spiral of stars, now cracked. Behind her, Musa approached with a battered tablet salvage from a pre-invasion armory. We got Empire chatter. Not encrypted, he said, breath fogging in the cool morning. They're angry, calling it an anomaly, maybe a rogue militia. They're not wrong, Juno murmured. We are rogue, but we're not a militia. We're a matchbook. She stood, watching a column of displaced civilians file through the jungle trail. Men, women, children, all carrying pieces of Earth's past. A boy clutched a rusted rocket launcher on his shoulder like it was a toy. A grandmother led others while pushing a cart filled with mortar shells. The convoy was heading north toward an old hydroelectric dam, their next base of operations. It had power, defensibility, and above all, obscurity. The Empire had overlooked it because it was obsolete, irrelevant. Just like them. Veroin watched the data feeds in silence from his command spire aboard the orbital dreadnought Sovereign Tithe. Streams of information danced across the air, infrared pings, sound profiles, seismic events. All pointed toward escalating resistance patterns in what was designated as Zone 14. They've adapted, the adjutant announced, hesitant. They're not attacking in numbers. They're bleeding us in flashes. Using camouflage, weather, even our own debris. Confirm species psychology update, Veruin replied coldly. Behavioral modifiers underestimated. Adjust classification. Add feral variables. He paused, something in his mind resisting the term. Feral implied instinct. These attacks were not that. They were deliberate. A sudden disturbance rippled across the hololith. An Empire convoy had gone dark in South Africa. No signals. No vital signs. The ambush had been orchestrated over 3 days. Juno's team mapped the convoy's path using stolen orbital snapshots and disrupted drones with scavenge jammers. The terrain was thick with brush and forgotten mining tunnels. Perfect for a trap. They used nothing new. Just old tricks polished to brutality. Pressure triggers. Flame pits. Concealed tripwires coated in phosphorus. The first vehicle went up in a thunderclap of heat and light, reducing advanced alloy to molten scrap. The troopers tried to respond, but they were blind. Jamming signals scrambled their HUDs, and the thick smoke disoriented their formation. Gunfire raked them from 2 directions. Not plasma, not lasers, just bullets. Fast, ugly, and fatal. When it was done, they left only the fire burning and a half-melted Empire banner spiked into the ground. Back at the dam, the power flickered to life. Old turbines groaned, and the overhead floodlights buzzed, revealing walls covered in charts, maps, and weapon racks. Children helped clean shells. Mechanics reassembled dismantled mortars and jury-rigged drone hulls. An entire generation of liberated humans now whispered code words and carried knives. Juno sat at the center of it all, poring over intercepted transmission logs. Her hair, once meticulously tied back, now hung loose and grimy. Her eyes burned, not from exhaustion, but purpose. She had stopped sleeping. Musa brought her food, untouched again. "You'll die before they do at this rate," he said, forcing a grin. "If I die and it slows them down, it's worth it. Don't say that in front of the kids. They need to hear it." Across the base, the girl with the bolt-action rifle, Amira, practiced reloading under a soldier's watchful eye. She was quiet, focused. Too focused for someone her age. But the Empire had made soldiers out of children without lifting a weapon. Occupation had done what no war ever could. That night, an explosion shattered the calm sky. An Empire skiff spiraling down, fire trailing behind it like a comet. Juno had seeded the skies with old war-era balloon mines. They weren't meant for stealth ships, but she figured if you threw enough teeth at the wind, something would bite. They rushed to the wreckage. It was still burning when they arrived. Inside, a survivor twitched among the dead. An adjutant-class alien, limbs mangled, visor cracked. Juno crouched beside him, her pistol aimed, but not yet fired. The alien's eyes flickered, adjusting to her form. "You, less evolved, yet relentless," it gasped. Juno tilted her head. "You said our weapons were jokes." The alien tried to speak, but blood, whatever color it was, filled its throat. She rose slowly and nodded to Musa. "Broadcast it," she said. Within the hour, every hijacked communication beacon across the Empire's occupied zones lit up with one clip, a dying Empire officer whispering defeat. No context, no message, just weakness. Across several continents, human eyes sparked in the dark. The resistance, once fractured, began to pulse in rhythm. In retaliation, the Empire descended with thunder. They launched raids on suspected hideouts, burning forests and gassing underground shelters. They executed civilians in public squares. Cities were re-blanketed in pacification fields, and neural dampeners were reinforced. The hammer came down, but something had changed. Humans didn't scatter like before. They moved like wolves, pack tactics, quick strikes, vanishing into terrain. They fought with knowledge of the land, of weather, of human fear turned into strength. Veruin stared at a new projection. Hundreds of resistance markers, each one once a quiet zone. The map now pulsed red. "This is no longer containment," the adjutant said. "This is insurgency." Veruin turned to his second-in-command. "And it's only just begun." At the dam, Juno walked the perimeter at dawn, watching smoke rise from distant hills. She stopped when she heard singing, soft, uncertain voices rising from a half-broken speaker. Someone had found an old recording of a war hymn, and the children sang along as best they could. She closed her eyes, just for a moment, and let it wash over her. This wasn't hope. It was defiance disguised as breath. Musa appeared beside her. "They're rallying across the globe," he said. "Cells popping up in Paris, Jakarta, even the old Arctic stations. They're not waiting for orders anymore. They finally believe." "In what?" Juno stared at the horizon, where another Empire ship glinted in the clouds. "That fire doesn't ask permission." He smiled grimly, then turned to walk. But before he left, he paused. "What happens when they stop underestimating us?" She didn't respond. She didn't need to, because by then, it would be far too late. The first wave of retaliation was not a strike. It was a purge. Empire dreadships descended without warning, their hulls splitting the clouds like blades. Plasma rain swept through abandoned cities, targeting broadcast towers, makeshift weapon forges, and even humanitarian shelters suspected of aiding the resistance. They called it phase cleansing. From orbit, it looked surgical. On the ground, it felt like firestorm genocide. Juno Reyes stood among the ruins of what had once been a refugee checkpoint near Lake Tanganyika. Concrete melted in twisted pools around her boots. The scent of ozone and scorched flesh haunted the wind. She didn't speak. Words would only fall into the ash. She walked forward slowly, her face dark with soot, her eyes sharp as steel. The mission had changed. It was no longer about survival. It was about erosion, grinding down an empire that mistook silence for peace. She wasn't here to make a statement. She was here to light the fuse that would never go out. 3 kilometers west, beneath the shell of a gutted rail yard, a new fire was building. Her team had repurposed decommissioned cargo drones into aerial bombers, each one armed with incendiary compounds and magnetic canisters filled with powdered thermite. The delivery system was crude, but that was the point. Precision was overrated. Fear was louder than accuracy. Musa approached, dragging a rusted cable behind him. He looked older than he had a month ago. No sleep. Too many fires. Still, he grinned when he saw her. 2 of the drones are ready for launch, he said. One's named Rage, the other Inheritance. Guess which one has the nuked-out school bell inside? Juno didn't return the smile. The one that rings after it hits. Musa nodded. Yeah. They had no illusions of victory. No delusions of forcing the Empire to flee in fear. But every hit, every explosion, every fire, they carved out into an enemy that had never known resistance from within. The Galactic Empire had built its dominion on the assumption that no world could survive its first strike. Earth was doing more than surviving. In orbit, Veroin stared at the latest casualty logs. 3 armored convoys lost in 2 days. 5 skiffs down by electromagnetic spikes hidden in derelict weather towers. Multiple officers dead, their helmets stripped and mailed to Empire outposts in blood-stained bundles. The War Council buzzed with recalibration protocols and threat matrices. None of it mattered. Veroin had seen the change in human patterning. It was no longer insurgency. It was infection. They know where our eyes are, he said, tracing a gloved hand along the path of the last fallen convoy. They moved beneath vision, in silence, in smoke. His adjutant, stiff and nervous, offered a datapad. We've intercepted a new human signal. It's audio only, translated from what they call English. Veroin gestured for it to play. A woman's voice filtered through the chamber, low and unshaken. You lit the sky with fire. We answered. You burned our cities. We became flame. Veroin said nothing. But for the first time since Orbitfall, he felt cold. The drone strike came that night. Human-modified cargo bots screeched low over the Highland outpost of Calregan, a recently constructed Empire communications node. They weren't quiet. They weren't sleek. But they were relentless. The first one dropped its payload, shards of depleted uranium soaked in jellied napalm. It wasn't the explosion that shattered the compound. It was the sound, The mechanical wail of the school bell inside the second drone, shrieking across the valley seconds before it hit. The fire bloomed like a birth scream. Veruin watched the feed go white, then red, then silent. Juno stood at a ridge overlooking the blaze. The fire danced in her reflection as she adjusted her worn combat vest. Around her, the team stared wordlessly. They had executed hundreds of small strikes, sabotages, and skirmishes. But this one was different. This wasn't a blow. It was a signature. They'll reinforce hard now, Musa said. Heavy armor. Orbit-locked kill satellites. The works. They have to, Juno replied. They're bleeding, and they know it. You really think they'll break? Juno turned slowly, her voice like dry paper. Not yet, but their pride will. The Empire responded by dropping pacification towers in every major sector, tall, humming monoliths that emitted subsonic pulses meant to pacify aggression and sedate free thought. Humans near them fell into lethargy, their minds fogged by invisible static. Juno's team adapted fast. They crafted Faraday-line masks from foil, copper mesh, and old mining suits. Children painted skulls and flames onto the gear. The resistance fighters started calling themselves the Fireborn, and they struck with purpose. One by one, the towers fell, not with high-tech weapons, but with sledgehammers, shaped charges, and barrels of corrosive acids looted from derelict labs. In Zanzibar, they dragged one down with a fishing trawler wrapped in chains. Each collapse was a signal. Earth would not be pacified. Veruin's anger finally broke protocol. He personally descended to lead a campaign in North Africa, deploying enhanced shock troops, mind-augmented commanders, and multi-spectrum sensors. He brought the full weight of Empire vengeance with him. Juno knew this was her moment. They prepared a trap beneath an ancient dam laced with explosives and flame ducts. It was an old weapon storage site from Earth's past wars, long thought useless. But history, like fire, had a way of waiting. Veruin entered the structure flanked by armor-clad elites. The moment his boots touched the floor, he knew something was wrong. The air was too still. The silence was deliberate. Juno's voice played from an old speaker tucked inside a rusted locker. You brought everything. Finally. I was beginning to think you didn't take us seriously. She stepped from the shadows above, flanked by 3 of her best marksmen. But she didn't fire. She just smiled. We wanted you to see it. Up close. The floor ignited. Fire surged up the walls, jets of fuel-fed flame exploding outward. The Empire troops fired in panic. Sensors glitched. Armor failed. Screams echoed. It was chaos, controlled and calculated. Juno and her team escaped through underwater tunnels seconds before the detonation. The dam collapsed in on itself, taking the entire strike force with it. When she emerged onto the shore, drenched and coughing, Musa was already waiting, dragging a salvage console. It worked, he said between breaths. We got him. He was in a blast radius. Juno slumped against a rock, pulling off her mask. Her face was cracked with ash, her eyes unblinking. No, she said. He's not dead, but now he knows something. Musa tilted his head. What's that? She looked toward the smoke climbing into the stars, then back down at her blister hands. That the fire isn't spreading anymore, she whispered. It's already everywhere. Smoke still clung to the atmosphere days after the dam's collapse, drifting in bruised clouds across the sky like the breath of a wounded planet. The world hadn't healed, and it never would. Not in the way the Galactic Empire expected. They had come seeking surrender, conquest, and compliance. What they found instead was flame that refused to go out. Juno Reyes sat atop a ridge overlooking the valley once known as Ngorongoro. Now it was nothing but scar tissue, blackened trees, melted Empire transports, and fragments of synthetic armor scattered like ash across the earth. Her hands were wrapped in gauze. The burns hadn't healed, and she didn't want them to. Pain reminded her she was still alive, but there was still work left to do. Around her, the Fireborn moved like whispers. Children patched gear with duct tape and wire. Veterans, once soldiers of defunct nations, shared ammunition in solemn silence. The mood wasn't triumphant. It was steady, controlled, dangerous. Musa crouched beside her, holding a weather-beaten tablet glowing faint blue. "The satellite's coming online again," he said. "Only for a few seconds. I can get us a feed." Juno nodded. The screen blinked, fuzzed, then cleared. High above Earth, the sovereign tide hung in low orbit like a rusted knife. Its hull showed scars, deep rents from past skirmishes, fresh pitting from solar flares. But something else stood out. A docking bay was sealed shut, the plating scorched black. Emergency tethers drifted loosely in vacuum. Even from a grainy image, it was obvious. The dreadship was damaged, crippled, no longer invincible. Musa grinned. The orbital jammers worked. We fried one of their own. Juno didn't smile. Instead, she stared at the image, calculating. She'd heard the rumors. Veruin had survived the dam explosion, but was no longer on the surface. His pride hadn't allowed retreat. This, exile to orbit, was his punishment. She stood, brushing dust off her legs. If he's up there, he's bleeding resources. They'll resupply eventually. Reinforce, regroup. Juno shook her head. No, the galaxy's watching now, and they're afraid. The Fireborn had leaked footage across the stars. Images of alien corpses, of civilians fighting with handcrafted explosives, of flamethrowers turning Empire patrols into twisted heaps of metal. In a dozen frontier worlds, uprisings began. Whispers turned to resistance. Primitive became powerful. She turned to Musa. "Are the message pods ready?" "Packed, coded, and aimed. We'll shoot them into the orbit path in the next launch window." "Good. Every planet out there needs to know. We weren't destroyed. We adapted." Musa hesitated, then looked past her toward the valley. "You think he'll retaliate again?" She paused. "Not like before. Not with fire. That belongs to us now." In the Empire's core communication halls, Veruin sat alone. The others had gone silent, lost interest in the Earth campaign. For them, Earth was a sideshow, a failed intimidation turned public embarrassment. He'd failed to pacify a planet with sticks and combustion. Worse, their recordings had spread unchecked. The idea of resistance, of weakness in the Empire, was no longer unthinkable. He replayed one of the transmissions. A human voice over static. Calm, measured, final. They laughed at our weapons. But now they understand. Fire is never obsolete. It's eternal. Veruin clenched a metal stylus, so hard it snapped in half. Back on the surface, the Fireborn began dismantling another captured Empire lander. Every component was stripped for parts. Batteries converted to IED triggers. Sensor nodes rewired for signal jamming. Power cores buried under pressure plates. Earth wasn't just surviving. It was harvesting the Empire's bones and turning them into blades. Amira, now fully grown into her teenage frame, moved confidently through the workshop. Her bolt-action rifle had been replaced with a custom hybrid, a human body welded with an Empire plasma coil. It sparked when she walked. People moved aside for her now. She found Juno beside the riverbed, staring into water that reflected only smoke. "We got incoming data. From Mars. They've pushed back their own pacification force." Juno didn't look away. "Good." And Titan, their domes were breached, but the locals rigged an oxygen siphon to ignite the assault ships. "They're learning." Amira stood quietly. "What happens now?" Juno finally looked at her, eyes tired but clear. "Now we stop being hunted. We become the story." By nightfall, a decision had been made. The next phase wasn't about defense. It was reclamation. The Fireborn targeted the remnants of Empire outposts, ones half-abandoned, barely monitored. They advanced with stolen skiffs and boots covered in dust, not armor. Their weapons were ugly and heavy, but they worked, and every blow they struck echoed far louder than any broadcast. In one of the final offensives, they reached the ruins of what had once been an Empire data vault. The structure was underground, shielded, never meant for human hands. But fire didn't care for intention. They laced the corridors with oil, thermite paste, and phosphorus grenades. When it detonated, a bloom of light erupted into the sky visible from 3 continents. Juno recorded her final message from that crater. To every species watching, she said, her voice hoarse and raw. They called our weapons primitive. But primitive things endure. They don't vanish. They survive the storms. The Empire brought war. We gave them fire. And fire spreads. The pod carrying her message was launched into orbit. It reached a neutral trading satellite, and from there, every corner of the known galaxy. Some dismissed it. Some laughed. But others watched it twice. Then again. Then shared it. Veron watched it too, in silence. By the time the council summoned him, it was too late. New revolts had begun across 3 systems. Resistance markers bloomed like fireflies. The myth of imperial invincibility was shattered. And every whisper of rebellion began the same way. They mocked the humans. Back on Earth, the flames died slowly. Not from defeat, but because they had done their work. The world was still scorched, broken in places, but it was free. Not because of treaties or politics, but because no one dared return. Juno Reyes died quietly in her sleep weeks later. Her body, wrapped in the old banner of a forgotten nation, was cremated in silence atop a high ridge. No eulogies, just fire. As she would have wanted, her last journal entry was scrawled across torn paper, pinned to the wall of the command cave. Primitive isn't weakness. It's foundation. Fire is the first tool, the last weapon, and the only thing they couldn't unmake. And in that truth, Earth had found its voice. Not in diplomacy, not in surrender, but in fire.